Welcome, this is Music and Mind, the interview series where I, Adam Ficek, speak with leading musicians about the intersection of music and mental health. Today I'm joined by the mighty Dolan Hewison of The New Fads. What are you up to musically at the moment?
Well, I've had a sort of like a 25-year rest, just bringing up children and starting businesses and running businesses. But I during lockdown, it wasn't really lockdown, but having that sort of, that definitely, it triggered something. But I got a loop pedal from a guitar and a piano, actually. My daughter was learning piano. And I just sort of unlocked something and I started writing. And then I quickly realized I was writing an album quite thematically as well. And so I did that, started that in 2020. And released it this year. In fact, the album came out in this month, start of this month, with a few singles as well, so under the name O Turn. So that, in a way, I'm as surprised as anyone that that actually happened. I didn't intend to do that. I just recorded it in my shed, got various people to help and contribute, and then also with my previous band, the new Fast Automatic Daffodils, the label I was on there issued a 40th anniversary of the label album last week, and on the back of that we also are releasing the very, very first demos we ever did in the flats in Hume, and a live recording which was the last gig we ever played, actually. It's properly multi-tracked at the Hacienda. And the very brief story of that is various things happened, but the studio we were mixing it down in got burgled and the hard drive got stolen, or so we thought. We were sort of stuck with the mixes as they were. And this is going back like 20 years, and we kind of almost gave up. We then revisited it, as I say, very, very recently. And lo and behold, the hard drive turned up in Elbow's hard drive library. It's kind of a long story. And the original mixes came to life, and it sounds fantastic. It was a sort of incredible gift. A pigsty involved a pigsty in Staffordshire, a 30-year-old Apple Mac, and a found hard drive. And lo and behold, there it is.
That's some story. What was it like for you psychologically? Where did that put you when you kind of got in touch with that stuff?
It made me really happy and very proud, actually. We all have remained really good friends. In fact, we're all going with our families and our wives and girlfriends, and now not quite grandchildren, but we're probably not far off that, on holiday to Spain, which and we do once a year. We do this, so we've made great friends. We also live quite locally. We've never done any music together again, but we've made great, which is the gift of the gift that the band gave us, was friendship more than anything. And so going through everything, it just makes me feel very proud. And without sounding too boastful, it's like, I don't know, can I swear on this podcast? Probably not.
Of course.
But fuck me, could we play? You listen to that live recording, it's like, really? Was that us? Could we really do that? So yeah, it was. It's a really good feeling, really enjoyable, and not in a more than what we could have been. It's just like, that was brilliant. We really had a great time.
Yeah, it sounds really uplifting, that sense of camaraderie. Would you say that's the best parts of what you were up to musically when you were younger?
It's an interesting one, that. I think the initial, because really literally last weekend we started going through this archive of saved, articles, photographs, etc. And when we very first started, the arc of it is, when we very first started, it was the camaraderie. It was just great fun. And then it sort of becomes a career, and it becomes a bit more difficult, and there's pressures on you. And, there's sort of competition within the group, because you're trying to, young men, egos, blah, 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 blah. So I think it became, towards the end, we're not enjoying that experience. And it probably ended at a very good point, because I think beyond that would have literally been, things may have happened that would have broken friendships. And we kind of had we lived out of each other's pockets for several years, literally. And I think there was a natural break afterwards. We kind of cooled off a bit, but we've always stayed in touch. And then really it's been in the past decade or so, once we sort of all had kids and gotten our feet a bit and got our lives back, we started to get more and more in contact with each other. Initially going for drinks, but strangely, our partners have become very good friends. And as much as anything, they've sort of pulled us into it. So it's really been a very, so the second half of that is that it is the gift that's given us, because obviously 30 years later, we have these fantastic friendships, and I would take that over anything we could have achieved as a band, because as you get older, that becomes more and more important.
What about music-wise? What's the most important aspect of music for you?
I mean, I think I'm trying not to fall into cliches. It's been a sanctuary, for me. When I was young, growing up, and to be brutally honest, we moved to this place, and I was sort of an outsider there, to say the least. And so it became a real sanctuary for me from quite a young age, and it's been this sort of constant companion of entertaining me, through playing and making music as well as listening. And I think the level of interest and passion, I see it in my children that, there's varying degrees of that. My daughter is obsessed by music. She listens to it all the time. She plays it all the time. And she's like me. And so I think for her, I can see that will be with her throughout her entire life. And it's quite reassuring to see that, because, as I say, it becomes becomes a sanctuary. And even now, if I sit and play the guitar for an hour, I forget about everything else in the world. And I've always found it a real sanctuary for me. And of course, the normal things of joy, euphoria, the sort of standard things. But I think more than anything, it keeps me out of trouble.
What do you mean by trouble?
Well, I think, that if it's good to have purpose, and it's really good to have direction. Not that I've been a particularly, I did started to get in a bit of trouble and stuff when I was younger at school. And I think it gave me a mission when I was younger. I think that's very important, having purpose, whatever it might be. And so it gave me a mission and purpose, in a way that probably at quite a young age, I was very determined to be a musician and be in a band and do all of those things. So it made decision making very, very easy for me about what I was going to next do in my life, because all of those decisions in my head were meant to lead towards actually becoming an artist. And I can see it with younger people that if they don't have that, it's like, what do I do with my life? And it was just really, really simple for me. It's like, that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah. What was the allure about being in a band, being an artist?
Well, I think there's the sort of romance of it all, the lifestyle and I don't mean lifestyle. I don't mean lifestyle as in, taking drugs and sleeping with loads of people and stuff. I mean more as in this sort of independent, itinerant sort of entity that can, travel and go places, and people would want to listen to what they have done and thought about. I often think that one of the things I'm so proud about the band about is what, reading all that stuff is literally it didn't exist. The music didn't exist. The name, nothing existed about it at all. No one knew who we were as individuals. We hadn't been in previous bands at all or anything really. And so out of nothing, we invented something that eventually became something that people would want to come and see and listen to. So I was interested in that very sort of romantic idea. And I remember just having this sort of vision in my head, like at that age of like, I'm going to go to Paris, I'm going to play a gig and people are going to come and see us. And I'm going to go to New York and people will come and see us. And I really believed that was going to happen. And lo and behold, it did. So that was, that was a real allure. And then I think the other thing was, it's about expression, isn't it? That you feel that you've not in a necessarily in a political sense or anything, but you feel like you've got something to offer, and something to give, and that in itself is a very sort of motivating thing. And I don't mean that in a big egotistical way. It's just that it's sort of, there's a fire in you and you want people to hear that. And that's very sort of motivating as a musician. So yeah, I think those two things probably are the most important.
Yeah.
But fame and so on wasn't, I'm not a very particularly gregarious person, and I struggled a little bit with small amount, tiny bit of fame that we had. I'm not that comfortable with it, so I was happier in the studio than I was on stage.
That brings me to what I was going to ask you next about how when the band or the brand almost becomes known, and it becomes an entity that then people superimpose upon you, how that impacted you.
I think it's a very, because I have always been, if I'm being really honest, very uncomfortable about performing. It's not a natural thing to me. On the positive side, having to, we played like 1,000 times, so something, we toured a lot. Making myself do that every, day in, day out, I think it really helped with my resilience, actually. It really, it made me very resilient, and actually I can do things that are really uncomfortable for me, and I can do them well, and I've just got to get my head around it. So I think I found, in a way, in reflection, I found that, quite a positive thing. And there was a sort of small moment, and when I say small moment, probably about, 6 months, 12 months, where you get recognized when you're out, and people come up to you and want autographs and want to talk to you. I didn't really particularly enjoy that, if I'm being honest. And I think you probably become aware that if you're on stage a lot, you experience people looking at you, and if you don't like that, you sort of take that with you a little bit off stage. So you're out for a drink out somewhere, and you kind of, it sounds paranoid, but you start thinking you're always on show a little bit. So God knows what it must be like if you're really famous. I would absolutely hate that. I've no desire to be recognized, but everyone is still very flattered by, the occasional thing someone comes up and goes, "Oh, you're so-and-so. I really listened to your record. It's fantastic." And it's meant a lot to me. But I think it's a very different thing between like a public appearance environment, like a gig, and then you expect afterwards and beforehand and around that to be on show. But, when you're in your private life, turning that off is difficult. I'm making it sound like I got this was I was getting mobbed. I mean, it was just a very short period of time where you just in the papers quite a bit, and the whole Manchester thing, and basically, you'd be out and people would know who you were, but it was a tiny thing. So I would hate to be really well known.
That brings me on to the next area where I was talking about this transition from music being a sanctuary growing up, and then we find ourselves in what I perceive to be more the corporate end of musicking, and how that impacts us.
So do you mean as in having to then engage with it as a sort of a commercial enterprise? And
yeah, was it still a sanctuary after you'd achieved some commercial success?
Yes, because we'd always end up in the you'd always be in the rehearsal room writing, and that they were the for me really, and being in the studio, particularly the first couple of albums were really incredibly creative and enjoyable environments. So whatever happened, you would be in there. The frustration, you're frustrated dealing with the industry, and I suppose you perceive their lack of understanding of you and what you're trying to do. I think my career now, running an agency, an advertising agency, has given me a different perspective on the people who are running the labels and the publishing companies. I mean, there was some unbelievable fuckwittery on their part that was very, very hard to deal with. And, in a more volatile younger me would, it's a good job they weren't in the same country as me, because of the had walked in the studio at certain points or certain decisions, I would have punched them, quite frankly. And but I understand that, you think you're the only band. I think the real challenge with anyone in the industry who's not a musician is they have to understand and appreciate that it's the band or the artist one chance. Pretty much, you get one chance. They're spread betting, so they're coming mentally and psychologically from a completely different perspective. On the flip side, the artists are thinking, I'm the most important thing. There's only me. Why are you thinking about other people? These people trying to run a business are going, yeah, but look, I've got like 50 people working here. I've got to pay them. Look, you guys aren't selling. I need to put back the artist that is selling. But, looking back, commercial appreciation, I think we would have made some better decisions as a band that would have been helpful to both us and to the record label. Equally, if they hadn't, the things that they did or pushed that were entirely wrong. And I think what happened, I think when you're successful, the bottom line is if you have success, you have power. And up until a certain point, we dictated all the single releases. We had tremendous arguments with the record label, and I'd like to say that I think we were absolutely right on every occasion. When we got to the end, the last album was like, this has got to succeed. So the pressure was on. And, we weren't a songwriting band. There wasn't one of us going to go off and write, the next hit song. It was a collective process. So it was very, very difficult to sort of dictate in a collective process something that's commercial, which caused a lot of tensions amongst us as a band. And I think, I was thinking too commercially. I think, Justin was thinking too uncommercially. And the idea was you try and bring those things together and somehow you hit something, the correct, pitch and stride of what you're trying to achieve. But I think with we sort of almost gave up to the label and said, you choose, and they got it really wrong. And I think for other art, I would always say to an artist now is you must be in control of your creative output. Do not let anyone else dictate that to you. But you hear of loads of stories. We found a note last weekend which is from Mute who in the States, who was our label in America, and it was about Stockholm, and they said, look, the mix isn't commercial enough and blah 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 blah, and it was actually the record label that got Sweet Child of Mine, Bob Claremont, to do that. The band didn't like it. It became their biggest hit. You've got to let us remix this, which they did, and a guy called Mike Spike Drake mixed it, I think it's called, or Dent, Mike Spike Dent, I can't remember. And it was, at the time we were like, it's not what and it's actually brilliant. And in hindsight, it's like they were totally right. So, we weren't right all the time. And it was that was a hit in the college radio in the States and in Europe. And so, who we got it all wrong. So we weren't right all the time.
And then bringing us back to your musicking now, what you're up to, how is it different, do you think, how you approach it all now?
Well, I think one is, on the one hand, I'm in control. I decide whether it's good or not. If I don't like what someone's done on it or sung on it, I can pull it. And I dictate the pace and the direction of it. So that's great. I like that. I like it less because of the control factor, but more of like the speed of it. It's less painful. I think on the other hand, I really miss collaboration. I do. I love nothing more than in a studio or rehearsal setting, playing with other musicians and the unexpected and I miss, I do miss playing with those guys, my previous band, because they would push me to do things that I would not do on my own and do normally. So it's a very, very different sort of creative process. It's very different, obviously, psychologically. It's more, you feel more vulnerable because you're on your own. There's no doubt about it, you know. And it's literally you. The hardest thing anyone can do is the hardest thing is a musician. There's loads of great musicians who can play better than anyone I would ever be able to achieve. But it's having taste. Taste is the most important fact of knowing what good looks like or sounds like. And it's very difficult doing that on your own. You've got to be pretty certain. So that's pretty tough. On the other hand, I think I don't care, which is really nice. So that's the counter to that. I'm like, I wouldn't have trusted my judgment when I was younger on my own, and it's almost like I don't even have to trust my judgment now. You know, my life's not my livelihood. My life's not riding on. My reputation's not riding on it. And I'm really confident that it's good. In fact, I know it's really good what I've done. But you know, if I'm being honest again, it's probably because I'm less invested, and therefore I can be more relaxed about it. So it's really enjoyable. Not giving a shit is really enjoyable.
And there's my concluding soundbite on that. So thank you very much for your time here. It's been really insightful, and I can hear this whole reflective journey. Thanks so much for listening today. I'm Adam Ficek. You've been listening to Music and Mind. Make sure you check out the Tonic Music website for free groups, workshops and courses for musicians, music fans and all those working in the industry.